thanks again. I'm John Matthews, Senior Justice Deputy for Supervisor Mitchell. That means I have the honor of helping to implement Supervisor Mitchell's vision for justice in LA County. I'm really excited about that. We have so many members of our team here, and these are the folks that you're gonna be engaging with in your breakout sessions. So if you see the Supervisor Mitchell background, they're part of Team Mitchell and they're here for you too. We really are committed to equity. That is the theme and the focus of our team. And so, we look forward to working with you to continue to build a thriving second district and a thriving LA County. We're really excited about the work that we're gonna do together. And this is the beginning of a conversation with many of you. Some of you have been in the struggle for years. And so we wanna partner with you. We wanna hear your ideas about like the ways to move forward. I really wanna thank the community leaders who helped organize this event. Derek Steele and David Turner, I know you're here and you're gonna chime in soon. But all of the community from really joining and making sure we lift up what's happening in our county with respect to Measure J and understand just how folks can get involved, because we really wanna make sure we're centering you, that we're including voices, that we're thinking about ideas that we previously hadn't thought of. So you'll notice when we do go to the breakout sessions, it's gonna be an opportunity to both discuss the issues, but also put ideas on a Jamboard so that it's documented and we can look at it and the supervisor can look at it. Some goals for today, we wanna provide background on Measure J. We wanna hear from members of the community who reached out about continuing efforts to incorporate more Black voices into the Measure J process. And like I said, Derek, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We wanna come together in small groups and talk about the proposals. Ultimately, the supervisor wants to hear from you. We want you to know what's going on so that you can weigh in with public comments and considerations. While the advisory committee, we're gonna talk a little bit about that, is deliberating in these weekly meetings. We want to be constantly thinking about the best ways for you to be engaged during such a difficult time for your families and for our county. So this is an ongoing process of really thinking about, COVID or otherwise, how to best engage our residents. We all look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully in the near future, and really getting out and understanding what your needs are. So I'd like to, let's make sure our tech is good. Can we see the next slide, please? So, what is Measure J? Many of you received the email and some of you have been involved. Many of you may have never even heard of Measure J. So we wanted to give you a brief overview. On November 3rd, 2020, LA County voters approved Measure J. Measure J requires that 10% of the unrestricted general funds be appropriated to community investment and alternatives to incarceration. LA County has 3 years to build up to the 10% target so that by fiscal year 2023-24, the full 10% allocation is incorporated annually, but obviously we want to get these dollars into community as soon as possible. One thing to note, we didn't want to just start with the voters approving the measure because so much work went into even getting Measure J on the ballot. There was so much organizing that happened that centered around a care first vision for LA County. So, for years and years, we just invested in carceral systems and in many cases at the expense of things happening in our community, including education, reentry services, pretrial services, health. We have a huge population of folks that are dealing with mental illness that are in cages because we have not provided the resources that they need. And so we thought it'd be helpful just to provide some of that context. Like I said, many of you already know about what's been moving in LA County, but we think it's important because the organizing that was happening that many of you were involved in that led up to Measure J is also part of the conversation in the process of how we want to be thinking about how these dollars are invested and how we can make our people and our communities whole. Next slide, please. So this may be a little difficult for some of you to see. I have my context on, so I can read a little bit, but this is just, if you look at it, a rough timeline of like the recent events. So when you think about the movement for Black Lives over the summer, for many of you, this is triggering because the George Floyd trial is happening as we speak. We know that a lot of the trauma that many Black families have faced for generations is still very raw. And so, we want to be centering those voices. But even, like I said, prior to last summer, there was so much organizing that was already happening and so many conversations about like, how can we really invest in our neighborhoods and our communities? So this is just a rough timeline. So what ended up happening is the LA County Board of Supervisors ended up, agreeing to put Measure J on the ballot. And a lot of organizing went into that process happening, first of all. And then once it was on the ballot, people voted, in my opinion, overwhelmingly for this idea of reimagining LA, reimagining public safety in LA County, understanding how we can really invest in our institutions. And we've come to this point now where there's an advisory committee that includes many community representatives, also some department heads in the county. And what they're doing right now is people have submitted hundreds of proposals in various categories, and we'll review the categories. But what's happening is they're reviewing these proposals and just like they're ranking them, they're seeing what people from the community want and want to hear. And so our hope is for the supervisor to understand what your ideas are. And we're really thinking long game, right? This is happening in real time, but we also want to be very sensitive to the fact that this is going to be a long-term process of really thinking about how we can make sure our budgets reflect our values. So at least a couple of the advisory committers are with us. We're not, there's certain Brown Act restrictions, so we don't have the whole advisory committee here, but there are some here just like listening, taking this all in. And ultimately we want to make sure we're continuing to develop processes to make sure you're included in the conversation. Next slide, please. So these are the Measure J subcommittees. These are the areas. So start thinking about, if you haven't already, sorry, technical difficulty. Really start thinking about these areas if you haven't already. So education, access, and youth development. There's several proposals that are already on the table for that. Economic opportunity and sustainability, housing, diversion, behavioral health, and health, and reentry. Those are like the 5 kind of major subcommittees. And these people are meeting every week and discussing proposals, figuring out how money should be allocated, and really just trying to figure out what's the best combination, both this year, but also in future years, how to really invest these dollars. If you can see the Measure J Reimagine LA Advisory Committee, so many organizations, you can read them. I'm not gonna read all of them, but so many organizations have been involved in the struggle. And so I think we should, be mindful of just like the amazing coalition work that has gone into all of this. I think we should be proud of it. There was a lot of talk, a lot of discussion around the national election, around Stacey Abrams and the organizing that was happening in Georgia, but LA County has some of the best organizers, and you all are part of that. Next slide, please. So also this may be a little bit difficult for everyone to see, but this is also another kind of timeline view of on the left side, there are the funding areas. You see how the county processes led to the formation of the Measure J subcommittees. The subcommittees they were constantly meeting and discussing recommendations. And now the advisory committee, which is evaluating all of this, is kind of like mid-process. They're working very hard. They have, in most cases, more than one full-time job and are working all the time. So like our goal is to not criticize any of their processes because they're putting in work and just trying to do the best they can for the community and figure out where we go from here. What's going to happen, they're going to submit recommendations to the CEO. To the CEO who is in charge of the county budget and figuring out these dollars and what they do. And then the CEO makes a recommendation to the LA County Board of Supervisors. There are 5 of them, all of them are women. That's amazing. Supervisor Mitchell is one of them. She's the most amazing in my opinion. And so they're gonna continue with that process. And keep in mind, this is not where it starts because this is gonna start again this year. Next slide, please. So yeah, we're committed to you, and this is, District 2 as a map. Next slide, I want to make sure I'm not cutting into someone else's. So yeah, let's go back to the next one. Oh, sorry, the last one. Yeah, so before, the next one. Oh no, forward, just like where the map was.
There's writing all over it.
Just right before where it said Derek, Steele, and David Turner. Yeah, right before that. Okay, so before we get to Derek and David, I actually wanted to give Veronica Lewis and Eunisses Hernandez a chance to just like give a bit more history and just to let you all know what's happening with the process. Veronica, you wanna chime in?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. I'm Veronica Lewis. Here today as the chair of the Measure J Advisory Committee. And I think it's amazing that there's so many people who are spending their Saturday mornings to discuss this, because it's really an important time of a paradigm shift in our community where we really look at cares first, which essentially means that jail will be the last resort. I look forward to hearing what comes out of this committee. I will say there's a couple of things I just want to uplift from the work of the advisory committee. One thing I also want you guys to know is that on the advisory committee, there are people who have been directly impacted by the system. And so you all saw the list of organizations, but really some of us are on the body because we represent different geographic areas of the county to ensure that there's coverage for all 5 supervisorial districts. And then there are folks with lived experience and, county department heads. So there's, not just organizations doing the work, but people who have actually been impacted, who have personal experiences that are lending their voices to the work. And the other thing I'll say is that, in addition to this community listening session, as you heard John say, we are working diligently, spending a lot of hours right now reviewing the recommendations that came from the community, in addition to the recommendations that came from the county departments. And there's an opportunity at each of those meetings for you all to lift your voice during the public comments section. And we actually asked for a little bit of additional time so that once our spending plan is finalized from the advisory committee, we will have 2 listening sessions specifically focused on categories so that you all can weigh in on what our final proposed design is before it goes to the CEO's office. And so we'll make sure that those who are registered, that the supervisor's office can get that information out to you all. But, the other thing I'll say is that, Derek and other folks here did formally address our committee with concern about Black voices having a meaningful seat at the table. And so, I look forward to making sure that everybody feels included and feels like they've had a role in this community process, and look forward to hearing what comes out of here. I really do hope that in your breakout sessions, you all can look at all the awesome work that's been done and add on to it, because there's been a lot of thoughtful review of what the gaps are in the system, what the racial inequities and just really the system barriers are, even to serving folks through existing programs. And so thanks for your time, and thank you for inviting me, Supervisor Mitchell and the rest of the team.
Thanks so much, Veronica. Eunisses, you want to chime in for a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Eunisses Hernandez. I'm the co-executive director and co-founder of La Defensa and a member of the Reimagine LA Coalition. I was also one of the co-chairs for the Measure J campaign and was one of the folks who helped write Measure J. And so just want to take a couple of minutes to give you all a little bit more background onto how we got to Measure J, how it came to fruition. John gave a little bit of a calendar or timeline on, since we got Measure J on the ballot, which was in the summertime. But like John mentioned, and to emphasize that we wouldn't have had Measure J if it wasn't for the sacrifice, like the loss of life that happened, the millions of people marching in the streets. And it also wouldn't have happened if we hadn't if community had not been working on these things for like years. We've been trying to stop LA County's $3.5 billion jail contract plan for over 10 years. It finally happened. We're on a roadmap now we have a plan of alternatives to incarceration. So when we talk about care first, for a lot of us, it's care first, jails never. And so how do we build out this decentralized system of care and green spaces for our people? And really that was a lot of the legwork that we have been doing for a long time. And we've also been doing budget work that, I'll be honest, has not been as successful as we wish because it's hard to move money. But when we talk about, things like moving away money from the traditional system of harm into our communities of justice reinvestment, there's been budget proposals that were pushed in the last couple of years. You saw the People's City budget in LA, but at the county level, community developed what's called the Care First budget that literally went line by line through the county budget saying, you're giving $2 million to prosecute to the DA's office to prosecute parents for not being able to get their kids to school. How about you move those $2 million to helping families so that they can get their kids to school? So that was also happening at the same time and a little bit before Measure J. So when it came time to be like, look, there's an opportunity where we think we can really move money at the county level. Look at all the legwork we've done. And so that's really what got us here, right? Like all the marching that folks were doing, the systems of harm showing how harmful they are right in our faces. We saw how people died here in LA County, Andres Guardado, Ross Jr., like so many people in our own backyard that got us to this point. And that's unfortunate that it happened at the loss of their life, but Measure J put us in a position where for the first time ever at the community has a say in how their tax dollars are spent. If you look back on history, what other moments have we had an opportunity like this to really move locally generated tax dollars into the things that we know are going to help our communities thrive? So, I mean, you all got us here to this point where we have Measure J, but it does build off of work that's been happening at the county level for many years. Especially in the Measure J space where we have phenomenal Black leaders like Mark Anthony Clayton Johnson, Brian Caneda, Ron Collins, who have been a part of the process to make sure that although the county wants to move one way, that we are moving the ship into the direction that's going to make sure that those dollars get directly to our community. So I'm really proud of the outcome of this year one. It's not over yet, so we still need you all to participate, but it's an opportunity that doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. Measure J is the first one. It's historic, and it's like the nation's looking at how we're going to do this and what we end up doing with these dollars. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining us Saturday morning. And all the work you've done leading up to this. I mean, these folks are champions and fighting every day, y'all. So really appreciate it. And Eunisses mentioned this. Veronica earlier also touched on this point where we are the example, the way LA goes, we're going to lead the country. So really excited. Next, I want to bring in Derek and David to just talk about how we got here and just some issues on their mind right now.
Fantastic. How's everyone doing today? My name is Derek Steele. I am the interim executive director of the Social Justice Learning Institute here based in Inglewood, California. However, I'm not just here representing the org, but also a movement. I think Veronica and Eunisses really put it very square as to how we got here and the big shoes, or not the big shoes, but the big picture of what everybody is looking for in this unique time that we're in, space that we're in. And the importance of making sure that we do everything to do as much as we can to get it right. And that's because, what we do now will reverberate into the halls of the future, right? And a lot of us may become nameless faces when people look back on history, but they'll be able to see the big movements that took place because of everybody getting on the same accord and really making the change come to bear that we want to see. And in doing that, the organizations that came together about this that I'll speak a lot about in the next few minutes, some of the framework that we believe is that by centering Black people in the creation of new policy system and institutions in the pursuit of economic liberation for all, we can and must reject the ideologies that may be grounded in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, right? Because we know that the way that these systems have been built have had anti-Blackness at the center and white supremacy there as well. And so in order to shift the narratives and to reinvigorate and share imagination, we got to disrupt the imbalance of the power in our society. And we believe that when Black people are made the priority and given the chance to share their true lived experiences, hopes, dreams, and values, and shared understanding of the systems that we need to create in America and in the country and in LA County in particular, centering Blackness is a pathway towards an inclusive progressive worldview that actively seeks to dismantle racism and build a better future for all people. When you transform things and you center Blackness in it, you're going to be able to transform systems for everyone. If we're taking police out of schools, we're not just taking police out of schools for Black students and Black children, we're taking police out of schools and how those schools operate without that, and actually have harm and also healing in the middle of it. We're transforming it from the whole entire school environment. So we're talking about transformative things that will be able to make a new and liberated world for all folks, right? And so getting into the presentation of where we are today, let me go ahead. Thank you very much. Kind of framing already why we're here today. And so we started going into this process with this thinking in mind of how we can do our part to be able to be transformative in space. You move on to the next slide. But as we were going through the process, and mind you, we got it across the finish line and did that work, but we're still in COVID. And so many of our organizations turned our eyes back to what is happening in community and working with folks. If you remember at that time, we were trying to figure out what was going to happen with the moratoriums being lifted, and people were trying to figure out what they're going to do to keep each other safe. So we were doing that work, food distributions, and resources provided to community. But the movement for Measure J continued on. And thanks to those who were a part of the movement of Reimagine, the Reimagine team, because they were keeping the mantle forward. But when we got to the 5-week process and the plan that got put in place, what we were finding is that the process was not fundamentally centering and led by voices of those systematically impacted all the way, right? We had organizations that were representing them, but we didn't have those folks actually leading and being in front of the process. And the outcomes of the subcommittee process, probably because of how the process was created competing priorities and different agendas. And in the speed of the process, people didn't know what time it was. And we had youth that wanted to engage, but folks were talking over their heads. Like the ideas and the issues and the leadership of Black folks were not being fully adjudicated and also being pushed to the side. So we said, wait a minute, let's pause for a second. Let's get together, let's have a conversation, right? And in that conversation, you can go on to the next slide. We started to think about what the data shows. The data shows that from an economic opportunity and sustainability standpoint, Black businesses and our African-American workers are with a high school degree or less were twice as likely to be unemployed as whites with the same education. Nearly half of the Black community has had either no job or a dead-end job that doesn't pay the basic needs of what they need. And that's coming from the Black Worker Center. In housing, Black people account for approximately 34% of the houseless population, despite making up 8% of LA County's residents. We move on to the next slide. The data also shows in education access and youth development that Black students' sustained participation in virtual classrooms have been most challenging for Black youth, who are showing participation rates between 10 to 20% lower than their white and Asian peers. Black families whose members disproportionately work as essential frontline workers, frequently in low-paying jobs, have exposed their family members to both health risks as well as trying to find out how they're going to oversee things that are going on for their children. So learning loss is a huge part of the problem. Then you have diversion in behavioral health. Since COVID-19 began, Black Americans have died twice the rate of white ones, right? So the data even further in the next slide, when we talk about reentry, the incarceration rates, as we all know, because the work we've been doing in this didn't start because of COVID. This is work that we've been doing for quite some time. We know that African Americans in Los Angeles County, 13 times more than that of whites, are getting incarcerated, right? So the data is clear. We understand it. And now we're going through this process. What do we do? Next slide, please. So the steps we took, we formed Voltron. We got everybody together, like, yo, what can we do together? And so this is the reason why I'm saying in this idea of a think tank, it's not just the social justice learning institute, the Brotherhood Crusade, it's building a man with youth guidance. There's the Black Lives Matter LA movement and Students Deserve and Youth Justice Coalition, who were the backbone of how this work got started from the summertime anyway. Brother Son Sales Coalition, Inner City Struggle, Blade, and Project Joy. We have folks from AV to Long Beach, from the West Side to Southeast LA who were involved in this process to have a conversation about how we can fully activate our presence in the Measure J subcommittee process, you know, because we can do what we're going to do, because there is a lot of work that was happening in that space, but we also wanted to elevate our voices, issues, and leadership through a letter campaign that resulted in a process for, that requested a process for having this conversation that we're having right now, to make sure that impacted folks have a say in how these dollars are actually being used, making sure that there is space and opportunity for people to be able to come together, say how these dollars should actually be provided. And we sent that letter, as Ms. Lewis so graciously mentioned, to the advisory committee, the advisory council, because we knew that a lot of the things were coming out of the subcommittee process were going to go to them, and they can help us in the idea of being able to transform the system a little bit. Move on to the next slide. I got to say thank you to Ms. Lewis for creating the space, because they decided to do, they brought together a council of folks to be able to come and speak to the council itself, to be able to bring these ideas and these issues to the forefront. Not only did they do that, but they also fully took on the conversation of how this can be made better next year and years that are to come. We also met with the supervisors, right? Starting with Supervisor Mitchell's office, who immediately was like, yeah, you know, we can definitely get on board with this. We want to make sure that we're elevating the voice of our folks, not only just in our district, but throughout the county, and how we can be an assistance in that. And we also made sure that we were showing up in public comments in the next meetings and making sure that we're getting our record and all the things that we brought to the table. So this gave us the chance to say, especially with the work with the supervisor's office, here we can do a survey to get wide understanding of what's going on in the community and how the funds should actually be used. And we can also have a community conversation to go even further to narrow down what community is saying about this, right? And so we started that process. That survey went out starting at the top of this week. And I'm excited to have Mr. David, soon to be Dr. David Turner, after this spring, you know, I'm kind of up for my brother, to be able to talk about what the initial responses. And mind you, we're going to be keeping the survey open until the end of the month, because again, the whole focus of what we're trying to achieve is to make sure that folks in the community have a say in what's going on. And what they're actually responding to is not just some arbitrary ideas of what we think should actually be recommended. These are actually recommendations that were coming out of the space of the subcommittee process, because there was great work that took place, not only just in that 5-week period, but also up to get ready for that 5-week period, right? So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to make sure that people are able to engage in all that work as well. But we want to be able to engage as a community. So I want to turn it over to David to actually talk about what the results for the survey are looking like.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Brother Derek. So again, people, really appreciate you all for opening up this space. I want to give a special shout out to LA County Supervisor District 2, Holly Mitchell's team, for continuing to be champions of the people, as well as listening to the people. And I really want to give a special shout out, to Eunisses Hernandez, to Veronica Lewis, to the folks from to the Measure J Advisory Committee, as well as to all the folks who participated in the subcommittee process. I think something needs to be said, in that when we have initiatives for racial justice, when we have initiatives for our communities, oftentimes these initiatives are rushed, they're pushed through. Oftentimes these initiatives, don't have the same level of interest in the process that allows for broad community input. And because of that, we run into a lot of challenges. It's almost as if these initiatives, right, are set up for challenges, right? But when we have initiatives that look to harm our communities, right, like trying to build new jails or trying to build stadiums, right, while displacing residents, these initiatives oftentimes are not only fast tracked but really streamlined and smooth. So I wanted to underscore that, right? Because I think it's really important for us, right, to acknowledge that, if we figure out how to get this right now, it's going to set the precedent for future generations to come as to how we're going to continue, right, like to center racial justice, to center the voices of community folks, as well as to allow that to build the momentum for a racially just Los Angeles, right? So I definitely just wanted to make sure to underscore that. And big shout out to Derek, right, for setting the context. So we were able to take the results from the subcommittee process, and we took all of the recommendations, read through all the recommendations, looked at the recommendations based on the themes that were coming up, whether we're talking about interventions for people who are impacted by sex trafficking, whether or not we're talking about housing opportunities, whether or not we're talking about youth development, right? We took all of these different interventions and then we tried to condense them into a survey, right, that people can take, that people can digest, and that made sense, right? So in a period of about 5 to 6 days, we were able to get 297 responses. 61% of these responses, again, we targeted Black folks, right? So 61% of these responses came directly from Black folks, 66% of whom were Black women, right? So again, right, like Black women continuing to show up for their communities as they have at the polls, as they have in organizing and in so many other spaces, right? So big shout out to my sisters there. In addition to that, we also wanted to know a little bit about how people were experiencing the pandemic, right? So 1 in 4 of the people who responded to the survey said that they were experiencing some form of financial insecurity. So maybe their hours got cut at their jobs, maybe they've been furloughed, maybe they don't have enough money for things, right? So that was a really big finding. In addition to that, 1 in 8 of the people who responded to the survey are unemployed. Right. So I think to Derek's point earlier, when we talk about employment, right, again, for Black folks, we're always twice whatever the national rate is. So definitely wanted to make sure to underscore that. And in addition, over half of the people who did take our survey said that their work is considered essential, right? So whether or not people are working in grocery stores, some of whom are being closed now because Kroger doesn't want to pay people, whether or not, people are working in hospitals or things of that nature, right? Like, again, that these are the people who took our survey. Can you hit the next slide for me, please? So again, right, like we wanted to make sure, right, that this got out to folks all across LA County, and there were 2 primary districts where we had the most responses. LA County Supervisor District 2, which had 56% of responses, and LA County Supervisor District 5, who had 17% of responses, right? But again, we know that District 2 also holds South LA, Compton, Inglewood, right? Like parts of Los Angeles that are not only historically Black, but continue to be Black, right? So with that being said, that the demographics of where people took this survey makes sense. Can you hit the next slide for me? So priority rankings. So we wanted to ask people of these 5 categories, where should money go first? And we did this not necessarily saying that all 5 of these don't deserve as much as we can possibly fund it, but we just wanted to try to gauge where people were. And one of the key themes that we found, right, throughout the responses was not only, right, that people wanted to fund youth, but that people wanted to fund the prevention. I think, again, right, when we talk about care first, jails last, right, like people wanted to fund the prevention, people wanted to fund the intervention up front, right, like, so that way it can be reflective in the type of ways that the county continues to spend money, right? So as you see on this chart to the left, 63% of respondents said education and youth development, that was their first or second choice, right? Like, and I think that's indicative of a lot of the work that, organizations like the Youth Justice Coalition, organizations like Brotherhood Crusade and these folks have done to elevate, right, like youth justice and youth development as a key issue to preventing, right, folks from getting involved in the system in the first place. In addition to that, right, like we saw, it was really close, where people looked at housing and economic opportunity and sustainability, right, like as top priorities. And then after that, we have behavioral health, and then finally reentry, right? So again, this isn't to say that none of these these issues are unimportant, because all of these issues are, in my opinion, right, like should be receiving the vast majority of funding from the county. But we know it doesn't happen that way, because unfortunately for a lot of our public systems, we invest way more in law enforcement than anything else. However, right, like in our survey, this is what people asked for. Go ahead and hit the next slide for me. So I'll try to get through these pretty quickly. So with these particular issues, right, like what were the priorities within these issues, right? We had anywhere between 4 to 6 priorities per area, right? And wanted to elevate the top 3 in each area. And I'll only review one in each, because I know we're running short on time and we do have a poll coming up. So you all will also get a chance to let us know what it is you think these priority areas should be. But the first area, right, for education and youth development was to provide support for high needs populations, right? So, you know, that's Black, Indigenous, and other youth of color, right? The systems impacted youth, LGBTQ youth, foster youth, right? Like making sure that there's support for those high need and specific populations. In addition to that, like the prevention and intervention programs that prevent violence, that are led by community-based organizations, and after school programs, as well as community-based organizations that partner with schools. Next slide. And after that, you also have the programs for housing, right? And again, right, like people wanted to fund the intervention. So we saw this throughout, where if it was something connected to youth, right, like that rose to the top regardless of what category it was in. So here in housing and homelessness, the top priority was funding and services for youth transitioning out of foster care or other forms of state supervision, right? So making sure that people have support, right? And again, priority 2, preserve and expand affordable housing options, right? And then 3, you have making sure that we fund permanent and temporary housing for low-income residents in LA County. Again, right, like we can make sure people have places to stay, right? So we don't have to go through these things where we have a homelessness issue when we have all of these empty spots where people can live. Economic opportunity and sustainability, where we have multi-year funding, right, for organizations that serve high needs populations, right? So folks that work with Black folks specifically, systems impacted communities, domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, foster youth, et cetera, right? Like people wanted to make sure that those organizations got funding first. After that, you have universal basic income, and then contracts for social enterprises that are led by Black and other impacted communities. Next slide for me. And then we have here
give you a 1 minute mark. We got to hear from the group. I'm gonna give you a 1 minute warning. Okay, we got to hear back from the groups, please.
Absolutely, almost done. So again, behavioral health and intervention, priority 1, you wanted to develop psychiatric mobile response teams, right, to make sure that that we can have people go and address crisis, right? Like that was people's #1 priority here, to divert adults with drug addiction from criminal court to drug treatment facilities, right? And then 3rd priority was community-based behavioral therapy facilitated through community spaces, right? So everybody can't afford a therapist, right? But what does it look like to make sure that we still have mental health centered in our communities? Final slide. And then finally, right, like for reentry and alternatives to incarceration. So the first piece right here was funding services for trauma-informed care, right? So case management, substance abuse, you know, making sure that people have childcare, rental assistance, and court services, right? Like that was people's top priority. And then priorities after that right, were services for for victims of human trafficking, for people who have experienced domestic violence and other forms of violence prevention, as well as community-led gang intervention. And then finally, right, like making sure that there was conflict resolution that was led by community folks, including restorative justice and community control over public safety. So with that being said, those are the responses from our survey, and I'll pass it back to the facilitation team.
Thanks so much, David. So at this point, this is really great. At this point, we want to talk about it. So we have a Zoom questionnaire. I don't want to call it a poll. It's just some questions that are going to lead into our breakout groups. Like, we really want to hear from you all. So what we're going to do is put up the Zoom questions. You're going to rank proposals, and then that's going to be the starting point in your breakout sessions to talk about just what you want to see, what you're seeing, and what's potentially missing from this discussion. So the poll, you should be seeing the poll up right now. So as of now, 7% have voted. Please continue to submit your votes. This is great. They're shooting up now. 14%, 15%, 16%. What we're going to do is, when you go into your breakouts, this will be the starting point of the conversation. We have facilitators from Team Mitchell. Also, Derek and David are going to assist with some facilitation and just talk about what you all are seeing. So this is really great feedback. Thank you.
John, does he say, like, is there a way to share what the numbers that are coming in, just really briefly before we go into the breakout?
Sure. So right now, what I'm seeing in category 1, 56% so far for provide support for high needs populations, Black, Indigenous, youth of color, BYOC, system impacted youth, LGBTQ youth, foster youth. We're at roughly 56%. For, hold on, sorry, I'm trying to scroll. It looks like roughly 50% is the top category in the housing and homelessness section. So specific funding for the development of permanent and temporary housing for low-income residents in Los Angeles is 50% versus 28% fund services and programs for youth transitioning out of foster care and other forms of state supervisions. For the next category, it's actually tied. We're looking at, with 69% voted, multi-year funding for organizations that serve high need populations, Black communities, system impacted communities, domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, foster youth, et cetera. That's 41%, followed by universal basic income, ensuring that everyone has access to a guaranteed income at 40%. We see 47% supporting community-based behavioral therapy facilitated through community spaces, institutions like barbershops, art and music therapy, Black-led community-based organizations, et cetera. That's roughly 47%. In the next category, the leader so far is 47% of community-led conflict resolution, such as transformative and restorative justice, intervention workers, community control for public safety. And I think we are just about ready to go to breakout sessions. Just let me check one thing for you all.
John, if I could just say something real quick, that after seeing those results and seeing what people have to say, it gives me a lot of hope, because the recommendations that we're reviewing now during the Measure J process align with a lot of these, like building out, service delivery in green spaces and community, giving young people access to housing. So I think there is a lot, like we were able to get a lot into the recs from the community members who were there participating in that. So it's just good to see the connections.
Love that. Thanks, Eunisses. All right, so at this point, I shared preliminary polling results with y'all. We're gonna go to breakout sessions, and one of the members of our team is gonna help facilitate that. This, like I said, this is a slightly bigger group than anticipated. Así que si habla español, déjanos saber, porque tenemos gente aquí que quien puede ayudar con Asistencia. Okay, so let's roll. We're back. How'd it go, y'all? I love my group.
My joint was kind of fire. I don't know. I think I might have the best one.
That was not enough time. We had a lot of great things to say.
We're gonna have to run it back. Really appreciate you all. Just for a couple minutes, I'd love to hear from a couple breakout sessions. Maybe I'm gonna start with who's just on my screen. Carolyn, any thoughts that came out of your session?
Sure. We had a really great group of diverse individuals, and we elevated, especially I'll just say under economic opportunity. There was just a comment that a lot of the priorities were around businesses. And one of our folks wanted to highlight that we need to talk about creating high quality jobs, not just about business opportunities for our most system impacted individuals, but job opportunities and career pathways into the middle class. So that was elevated.
That's great. I see, Derek, you had a session too, right?
I did, and we had a very wide-ranging group of folks thinking about this from how we're impacting how we are using these funds to have those who are already systemically impacted and already dealing with touches from the system, but also those who are really thoughtful and bringing the ideas from a preventative standpoint, and how we're using these to actually change paradigms for the future of LA County as well. And I think we had a very robust discussion from both of those angles, and I'm really excited about them being able to share and have the opportunity through the Jamboard to provide us the pieces that they believe are actually missing. It's really just a small touch point. I think one of the other things that got elevated was through the discussion. One person was like, you know what, I see how I would respond to these things, but now taking myself out of the center and thinking about those who are even more impacted than I think I am, how they would respond to it as well, right? And so being able to be like, how do we broaden the scope of this? This is a very big deal. This is going to be a lot of fun, and I really appreciate having the conversation.